Welcome to the second episode of the TerpTalk podcast, powered by Viner Consulting. This is your host, Mason Viner.
And your co-host, Jordan Viner.
And today, we are coming to you from Athens, Greece, where we will be talking about Greek sports, specifically the Olympics and basketball, Maryland's newest recruit, Noah Boykin, and what it really means in football to be star-rated, and Otto Porter and NBA free agency. Jordan, let's fire up the shot clock and kick it off with Greek sports.
Well, I think of sports, what's the first thing that comes to your head, Mason?
Well, for me, it's the Olympics first because it started here in Greece, and then basketball because all these Greek players are up and coming, specifically an All-NBA second-teamer from last year, Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Yeah, those are the main focuses here in Greece, along with soccer. The Olympics are a big deal here. We can see that everywhere. You know, when you took our guided tour, the Olympics are all over the city.
Well, a lot of things here in Greece are done because of the 2004 Olympics that were such a big deal to the city of Athens. They found the original Olympic Stadium from 1896, added onto it to be able to use it in 2004, and it is the heart of the city is competition in the Olympics.
We can see that a lot. That stadium they used in 1896 was actually first built in, I believe, around the year 100 for the original Olympics, and they added onto it to host more events. It hosted the track events in 2004, and everywhere with historical Greek artwork, it's competition, you know, races, battles, duels. It's actually quite amazing.
Yeah, but now, talking about basketball, it feeds into the competition of Greece, but Greek basketball is very up and coming, but it seems to have been around for a lot longer than people know with the two teams here, Olympiacos BC and Pathikos BC.
The BC is necessary because of the way the clubs are structured here in Europe. They're called clubs for a reason. It's a combination of all the different sports. For example, the Real Madrid soccer team that many people know about, which I believe has Cristiano Ronaldo on it. Mason, am I correct?
Yeah.
They also have a basketball wing, which is actually very highly ranked. So the BC and the FCs, which you see a lot standing for football club, are necessary. And they have some other sports that Mason was quite surprised by.
So Olympiacos BC here in Athens has a beach volleyball club, women's and men's volleyball normal, and they have a rowing team and a canoeing team, which I found to be completely obscure, considering that in the U.S. we don't see those kinds of teams as making a lot of money.
Personally, I don't even know the difference between rowing and canoeing, but that's my own fault. So Olympiacos BC is very accomplished. Mason, what are some accomplishments?
Well, for Olympiacos BC, they are the three-time EuroLeague champions. The EuroLeague is an NCAA tournament-like tournament here in Europe, where it has a selection committee and they select what they believe to be the best teams in Europe to go play in the EuroLeague. They are the five-time runners-ups of the EuroLeague. They've played in 10 EuroLeague Final Fours. They play in the Peace and Friendship Stadium that we saw. It's just outside of Athens. The capacity is 12,000. Olympiacos BC placed 6th in European basketball attendance this last season with, on average, 8,449 fans.
Yeah, Olympiacos is one of the most popular clubs in the world. They have the 9th most members of any club in the world, placing one spot in front of the popular Real Madrid that we all, or at least most of us, know about. And they really do have a deep following in Athens. They are considered Athens' main team for soccer, but not so much for basketball. That's their second team, Pathikos, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They have had some notable players go through Greek in terms of Greek basketball. They have, which is actually a big deal, they have consistent pay rates for players, which doesn't sound too special, but believe me, in a lot of these leagues it is. And they play with really high attendance. They play higher than most college teams.
Yeah, I find that to be interesting because when you think about a Greek basketball team, if you ask most people about it, they won't really know that they average around 8,500 fans a game. You think that they're like rinky-dink team playing in an unair-conditioned stadium that can't afford to pay their players.
Well, our second team is Pathikos BC, one of the greatest teams in European history. Mason, tell us a little bit about them.
Well, as you just said, they are the greatest team in Greek history. They are the 6-time EuroLeague champions. They've won 35 Greek League championships. So that's like the Celtics and the Lakers combined if you're talking NBA terms.
For reference, Olympiacos has won about 16.
And they play in the 2004 Olympic basketball venue, which is the biggest Olympic basketball venue of all time. It is 19,000. That's the capacity. They lead Europe all of Europe in attendance with 10,000 fans per game, and they have some Terps.
Yeah, though they did have some Terps that have won now. They had Drew Nicholas, who is currently a scout for the Minnesota Timberwolves from 2008 to 2011. They had Serenas Cavages, who a Maryland point guard from the 90s, who I didn't know a ton about until I started researching international basketball, but has had a very successful career internationally. He played in Greece from 2007 to 2010, and then he went back to his home country of Lithuania, where he's now a coach of one of the more popular Lithuanian teams. An interesting international basketball thing as well is Lithuania is one of two countries in the world that has basketball as its most popular sport based on internet chatter. The U.S. doesn't count because, football. The other current Terp on Pathos would be James Gist, who has a nickname that Mason cannot get enough of, which is
James Beast!
Known as James Beast for his vicious dunking and blocking that many Maryland fans will remember from his time in College Park. And he has also added a three-point stroke to my great shock.
Well, that speaks to the European style of basketball. A lot of the European players, man, can they shoot, as Wayne says a lot when we watch EuroLeague basketball. They're just really great shooters, and it lets players like James Gist develop three-point shots.
Yeah, and that's the thing I wish about European basketball. I really do like it a lot. The fans seem to be really dedicated, and I wish it was on TV more in the U.S. I understand why it's not, but there is some high-level competition in the European League, and I really wish it was on TV more in the U.S.
Well, it is on NBA TV. That's really the only place I've ever seen it on, cable television, but to get another league televised, they also play at odd times here in Europe, as we would see it in the U.S. if it was live. So it's really hard for U.S. carriers to really carry the games, but I would love to see more of it. It's a different style of basketball completely, and it speaks to the growth of the game of basketball around the world.
Yeah, basketball in the last 30, 20 years has become a real international sport, especially with the rise of NBA superstars in the 80s like Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson, and you could throw in a couple European stars too. I know Durkin has had a huge impact on getting Europeans to play more. I saw an interview with Giannis a while ago that saying Dirk Nowitzki and having a European of that much stardom had a great impact on him, and I think it'll become more evident in the future. I believe the next breed of NBA superstars will be European.
Well, with this last draft class, that kind of puts that in contention with guys like Lonzo Ball and Markelle Fultz coming into the league. I think it'll be an interesting mix between our traditional U.S. stars and international stars. So we're going to move on here on the TerpTalk podcast. Remember to check out our YouTube page, Wayne Terp, on YouTube for all the interviews from the recent Under Armour Lacrosse All-American game to see the new generation of Maryland lacrosse stars. So we're now going to move on to a conversation about Noah Boynton, Maryland football's newest commit. Jordan, fire up the shot clock.
We have 10 minutes on the shot clock, so let's look at Noah Boynton. He is a 6'2" recruit, tremendous athlete. He plays free safety. He weighs just under 200 pounds. He can cover the field in a very short amount of time. I think he's a real winner.
Well, you're talking about a guy, Noah Boynton, H.D. Woodson High School in D.C., where his teammate Vincent Flythe recently committed to the Terps. And I like Noah Boynton a lot. I think he's a great size, great athlete, and he had a lot of major school offers. Jordan, tell us some.
Well, he had offers from around the country. He had offers from Clemson, Michigan, Oklahoma, and Tennessee were just some of the major ones. I'm sure he had more. He was a good get for Maryland, and I don't know why he committed to Maryland, honestly. Mason, what do you think?
Well, the great recruiting of a proven D.C. recruiter, Aziz Abdul-Rahim, who started a program, Friendship Collegiate High School. He is a known top 10 recruiter around the country. And unlike a lot of these guys that Maryland ends up getting with the major offers, they were not his first offer. It was actually Clemson. So when a guy like Noah Boynton looks at college, Jordan's been through this process, the parents always want the kid to stay at home. Now, that might not be the case with Noah Boynton. He might actually really like Maryland, but there's still a high flight risk, as Jordan's put it, on him decommitting from the Terps.
Well, he reminds me of a guy who, also from D.C., who we got last year, another 3-star, Kofi Wardlow. He flipped to Notre Dame on signing day. And as Wayne and Bruce say, it's really hard to look at Notre Dame and then choose Maryland.
Yeah, Kofi Wardlow, St. John's College in D.C., really good player, but he had the offers, but he ended up flipping away from the Terps on signing day. So when you're moving on through this conversation, you say, how does a 3-star like Noah Boykin have these offers?
Well, he said back 2 weeks ago now in an interview with Scout that he wanted to go look at Michigan and then would releasing his top 10 later in the summer, but he never did either of those things. He just committed to Maryland. So my question is, why would he not go to Michigan and think about it more before he just committed?
Well, I really can't answer that. I don't know what happened. Maybe Maryland sold him extremely well and he decided to commit now. But when you're talking about a 3-star, there are a lot of 3-stars that have prime offers. And I think that speaks to how athletic and really good these colleges think Noah Boykin is. So, Jordan, we've been through this conversation, or I have a lot of 4-star disappointments and guys from public schools, smaller recruits that have really developed and turned into really good Maryland players. So when we were talking about this, when planning this podcast, you didn't really know about it, and I don't think a lot of fans do. So tell me about the differences between a 5-star basketball player and a 5-star football player.
Well, basketball is different, at least in my opinion, in that you look at players and you know if they can play or not. It's an interesting phenomenon, especially because it doesn't happen in many other sports. And in football, there's a lot of environmental factors going on. You need to look at levels of competition, their style of play, their offense or defense that they're in, who their coaches are. It's just a lot more that goes into looking at football players.
And that's why I see guys like Kofi Wardlow and Noah Boykin most recently for the Terps that had these offers. But there's been some really private school 4-star guys that you think are going to be really good that have been disappointments, like Corvez Bulwer, who's now played 2 years for Maryland. He was a 4-star, was between Maryland and the University of Florida, who's a power football team, and he ended up coming to Maryland and not really doing anything. He was a guard. Now I believe he's playing for center, and Jordan didn't even know that he still was on the Maryland roster when we went to go do this podcast. Another one is one of the biggest disappointments in my mind from recent Maryland football recruiting, which is Caleb Porzel, a running back, Good Counsel High School in Maryland. Really was a big get for the Terps in the Ralph Region era, and he ended up not doing anything, and I believe transferring to a high-level FCS school. There have also been some public school guys, Jordan.
Well, one of my all-time favorite players, and probably the greatest Terp running back of my generation, is Darrell Scott, who was from a 2-star recruit from a local high school in Philadelphia, public school, and a recent anchor for Maryland's offensive line who is playing for... Do we know who he's playing for, Mason?
I don't believe it, but I know that he is getting a chance at the NFL. That is Michael Dunn, the recent anchor of the Terps offensive line. He went to Walt Whitman High School in Potomac, Maryland, and really anchored down Maryland's line in a tough time. You know, Maryland had a lot of young offensive linemen last year, and he was that senior anchor. So there's a bit of a comparison about how you can find guys that are in the right system for your team, that are lower-level recruits that can end up outperforming high-star private school guys.
Which brings up the next question, which is how do you evaluate these players? For example, Woodson has their Big 5 recruits, which are 4 3-stars and 1 4-star, Malachi Saludan, who went to USC last week. And Maryland's looking to get... They already have 2 of the Big 5, which are Vincent Flythe and Noah Boykin. They're looking at Ed Hendricks, receiver, who they're trying to get now. And the question becomes, if they're all in the same field, like the Big 5 are, how do you evaluate them? How do you decide that Malachi Saludan is better than anybody else in the field?
Well, that can go to pure film evaluation, which is really hard to do if you're not a real football guy, is to look at the highlight tape and figure out what this guy can do and what he can't. Now, there's always adding the strength and conditioning, and they look at a lot of times of what shape these guys are in, because most linemen are going to take a redshirt year, where they get fit and they go with the strength and conditioning team. So when you're looking at these guys, you have to look at specific guys. You have to see them play in person and look at their mannerisms on the field and their football IQ and what that tells them. That's a big part of looking at the recruiting of these guys that Durkin and his staff have been so good at recently.
Yeah, it's not easy to figure out how good players are because of all the other factors I mentioned earlier. I think the biggest one for me is level of competition, which is when you look at a player in the WCAC, like a Caleb Porzell, and you see him dusting guys there, you're inclined to think that he'll be able to continue to do that because the level in the WCAC is so high, versus in public school, you might think they may not be as good because they're just facing lower competition.
That's a big part of this, and I think that's a big part of the whole national recruiting here, because let's say I played football, and I played at our local school, Wheaton High School, I would get on TV maybe once in my career, and that's if my team went to the state championship game. And even then, you're on a local news channel, then you're not getting that many viewers. But if you're a Caleb Porzell, Lorenzo Harrison, guys that went to DeMatha, Good Counsel, Gilman, Calvert Hall, those are the schools in our area that really get on these television, you're going to be on ESPNU maybe more than 1 or 2 times a year because of their Friday night high school primetime games. I remember Lorenzo Harrison was the number 1 play on SportsCenter, and it was because it was nationally televised.
Well, to me, this brings it back to the basketball versus football comparison, which is to say there's no AAU for football. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. Football is more expensive to play. You need pads. You need more guys. But there's no way, if you play public school ball, to get more exposure.
Well, here's where I see a difference. There are football camps. There are 7-on-7. College teams host them, and they look at these players and try and figure out which ones they want to recruit. But there's such a difference between touch football, which is a 7-on-7, against real 11-on-11 with football with linemen. It gets a look at the talent players and the skill players, but not those linemen that really build up a team. So that's what happens with football. You don't get as many looks if you're a college coach at them.
Okay, we're at 30 seconds. What are your final thoughts, Mason?
Don't ever overlook the 3-star and 2-star guys that Maryland football is going to get. They have to build the foundation, and they look really hard at every player that they get commitments from, because they want them to fit in the system, be the right fit for Maryland football, or any football team in college. So these guys one day might be the stars of Maryland football, like the Darrell Scotts and Michael Duns.
I would say this plays back to last week's discussion about basketball versus football recruiting. This has actually kind of changed my mind a little bit. It is a lot harder to evaluate football guys than basketball guys. I do think Maryland basketball still has a higher quality, but I think football is different, and we need to treat it as such.
Well, we forgot about this fact in this, that was the 12th out of 14 DMV to UMD guy in Maryland's football class that is shaping up to be better than the Michigans. And that is the Shot Clock's time. And remember to check out the TerpTalk radio show, hosted by Bruce Posner, 1300 CVS Sports Radio in Baltimore, 9 o'clock a.m. You can on Saturday.com app. So moving on to Otto Porter and NBA free agency. So when looking at the Wizards and their decision that will be coming up on Otto Porter, what do we expect to see, Jordan?
There is no decision. Decision's already been made. Otto Porter will receive a max contract from the Wizards. It's just it. I'm sorry for the people that don't like Otto Porter, but there's nothing else they can do. They don't have any cap room left. They don't really have a small forward anymore with Bojan Bogdanovic going to the Pacers. I think the decision's already been made in D.C. Otto Porter is staying for the long haul.
Well, there were reports of it already being made, and the Bojan Bogdanovic letting go of his restricted free agency, meaning every offer that he got could be looked at and matched by the Wizards, and he would end up on the Wizards given any offer, has now moved on. They released him last night, and he immediately signed with the Indiana Pacers for around $10 million a year. And so now you're giving Otto Porter a max contract because you don't really have any cap room to work with left.
Yeah, that's basically what I just said. Otto is in D.C. for the long haul. I think we need to think about what we can expect from the Wizards next season at this point. The roster is pretty well made. If Otto Porter's added, it'll be number 15 in the roster spots. That's all the roster spots you have. I think we need to talk about what we're going to expect from the Wizards now.
Well, I said last week that it's second round and out now for the Wizards. They're now facing a considered super team Celtics, and you're always facing LeBron and the Cavs. They might be making some moves to move Kevin Love and get another star on their team to replace Kevin Love. And you're looking at teams that have superstars. We have one, John Wall. You're looking at, if you face the Celtics, Isaiah Thomas. If you face the Cavs, you're looking at LeBron. So I see, as I said last week on the podcast, we're seeing second round and out.
Unfortunately, that does seem to be true at this point. The Wizards they're a good team. They finally seem to have a well-stocked bench that remains to be seen, but it doesn't look like it's going to be enough to push over adding Gordon Hayward to the Celtics. There's nothing they could have done besides adding Paul George, which was always a long shot, to match the Celtics in this race to try to get to lose to the Cavs.
I'm not sure if they actually got Paul George, what would happen when they played the Cavs, but when we were looking at the trade with Paul George, the Thunder got undersold. I think the Wizards could have given them more. I would love to see Paul George in DC, but it didn't happen. Otto Porter is now our guy. You're going to have him for a long time now. You're going to have Wall, Beal, and Otto Porter. Those are going to be your three DC guys. And it's better than what DC has had for a long time. Now, they've been failing a franchise in the mid-2000s, and now they're back to a good place.
Well, interestingly, in terms of the franchise history, I saw a piece on Bleacher Report today about every team's, quote, Mount Rushmore, or the top four teams, or the top four players' impact, on each team. The Wizards had Wes Unseld, who spent his entire season in D.C., considered basically the greatest player in Wizards history. He won MVP and Rookie of the Year in his rookie season. Who else? Elvin Hayes, who leads the team in rebounds historically. Gus Johnson, who is a fantastic point guard, who unfortunately died of cancer pretty recently, I think, although I'm not sure about that. And John Wall. And it's interesting that John Wall is already up there, and that speaks to the fact the Wizards are in the best place they've been in a long time now.
Well, yeah, that's basically what I've been thinking about the Wizards is it would be a lot for them to say, Otto Porter, we're going to let you go and go back to just having two guys that are really solid young pieces. They can ride this out. They will be in the playoffs with the three guys healthy, being Wall, Beal, and Otto Porter. If they're healthy, the Wizards are going to make the playoffs. And most likely the second round. But now you could run into the Heat, who are trying to add another star. And there are some good teams shaping up in the Eastern Conference.
Quick correction, Gus Johnson actually died a long time ago in 1987. That's my bad. Now, you mentioned the Heat are trying to add another star. My question is who at this point? The NBA free agency, for the most part, has settled. And the league looks very, very different than it did last season already. That's actually mostly due because of trades rather than free agency. But regardless, the East is a lot lighter now. Paul Millsap, Jimmy Butler, and Paul George all left the building. That seems like it'd be a good thing, but it doesn't help the Wizards. There's still two big roadblocks they can't overcome. Or, we don't know that. Maybe they will. But it doesn't seem like they can.
Well, NBA free agency is wrapping up other than the little guys, but the stars that I think the Heat are trying to add is they're going to try and add a deadline guy, trade deadline move, and they're going to trade their picks for him. They think that they, now adding Kelly Olynyk on a very favorable contract in my mind of $10 million a year compared to a guy like Jan Mahimi last year getting 15, but the Heat are going to try and add that guy that's going to make them good with Hassan Whiteside and Goran Dragic already on their team.
It's still $12.5 million a year. And you're right. Looking at Yamahimi's contract, Kelly Olynyk seems like a pretty good deal. He had a fairly decent season. But if we talk about Kelly Olynyk, we have to talk about the rest of the Celtics and saying that they are looking to deal either Trey Rozier or Marcus Smart, one of their two backup point guards, to try to open up some more room for Gordon Hayward. And I think the Wizards might be able to jump there. Marcus Smart, I think, would be a great addition of toughness to the Wizards and will play well with Kelly Olynyk. But I don't know if that's even going to be enough. I don't know if there's anything the Wizards could really do to try to get over the second-round hump.
Yeah, that would be good. Marcus Smart, I feel like, is kind of a Markieff Morris-like player. He's tough. He'll get in your face. I liked him a lot when he played for Oklahoma State back in college. And he can play the 2 and the 1. He has a lot of size, great rebounder. And if Trey Frazier, I believe that's his name, doesn't play well, he would be a really good addition at point guard.
That would be Tim Frazier, ex-Pelicans and Penn State point guard. So let's look at the rest of the league now. The Thunder, do they have enough firepower now with Paul George to maybe match into the second round?
So here's what I think is interesting about a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder. Russell Westbrook had an amazing season, but you never saw him play like that when KD was on the roster and playing well because it was all about KD. Now, Paul George isn't going to have as big a role as Kevin Durant did. But can Russell Westbrook still produce like he did this past season, which was an MVP year for him, with Paul George, another superstar, on the roster?
I don't think he can, but I still think he's one of the best players in the league. I think the Rockets with Chris Paul and James Harden they are still going to lose to the Spurs, is my professional opinion here. But they look really good now. The Spurs don't look too shabby either. Adding Rudy Gay will probably start small forward now. Excuse me, not small forward. At shooting guard, I think Rudy Gay will start. I think he'll play off Kawhi Leonard well. I think the Spurs still don't have enough to push over the Warriors. I don't think anyone in the league does. And this brings up an issue with NBA parity. That's an issue for another day. But the league will definitely be interesting next year.
Well, I think it's going to be more interesting on the Eastern Conference side, which has kind of been blown almost wide open by trades with Paul George leaving and Jimmy Butler. I think it's going to be really interesting to see who gets that third seed in the East, the fourth, and who's going to come out in the East this year. Because the Western Conference is really sealed up. Like, you have your teams with stars, and then you have the teams that don't. And who will play well in the West, it's just going to shape up. And come playoff time, that's when it's going to be decided. That's when the true stars will come out.
With about $1:30 left on the shot clock, I'm going to say my region of the year for the NBA is the Midwest, Upper Midwest area, with the Pacers, the Bulls, the Bucks, and the Timberwolves. I think all those teams will be very interesting. The Timberwolves with Jimmy Butler and Cat and Wiggins will be very interesting to see how they play out, if they can gel into a playoff team finally. The Bucks with Giannis Antetokounmpo and their little youth movement up there, I think could be a dark horse contender in the East. I really do. I'll be interested to see where the Pacers will be going, as well as the Bulls. The Bulls have seemed to kind of blow apart in the last few weeks. Let's see if they can pull themselves back together.
I think the Bulls did that on purpose, but here's my question for you, Jordan. Is Giannis Antetokounmpo your favorite player in the NBA? Because he seems to come up in this podcast every week.
I love Giannis Antetokounmpo. I think he represents what the NBA can offer, or what the world can offer to the NBA. I think he is the next true NBA megastar, and I think he'll be able to. I think he'll expand the reach of basketball in the world, and I think he'll be a prototype for future stars.
So here's my final wrap-up, mainly going to be on the Wizards. The Wizards have to stay with Otto Porter. I think there have been reports that they've already signed the offer sheet, but from the Wizards it has not come out yet. And they're going to be stuck in there, and maybe they'll make a run one of these years. They almost beat the Celtics this last year. Jason Tatum and Gordon Hayward have both been added on to the Celtics. It's going to be a hard team to beat this year. And that will just about wrap it up for the TerpTalk podcast presented by Viner Consulting. You can visit Viner Consulting for all your technology needs at oneviner, VIENER.com. Jordan, give us a look into next week's podcast.
Next week, we will be in Israel, continuing our Mediterranean tour. We have Israeli sports on tap. Our best Maryland, both in our opinion, the best Maryland basketball players of our generation, and a look at NBA versus NFL contracts.
And remember to listen to Bruce at 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings, and check out Wayne Terp on YouTube. This has been it for the TerpTalk podcast, episode number 2. See you next week.